We once again return to part 4 of The Hero's Path, a 7-part miniseries covering the various journeys of the most important characters while embroiled in the chaos that was the Great Calamity. If you haven't already, be sure to check out the previous parts and especially the one about Link and Zelda, since the later episodes skip over most of the introduction established in that one and start right away at the moment of Ganon's rise. Joining me today, all the way from the 5th dimension, the master of hype, Mr. HMK. I am very excited to finally have him on the channel. Be sure to check out his amazing theories as well as his podcast The 5th Dimension, in which he invites various guests to talk about specific games, one of which recently hosted a plethora of Zelda theorists including me to sit down and talk about the upcoming Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. And let me tell you, the hype is real. And now it is time to get this show on the road once again.
As the ground begins to shake beneath the feet of the champions and the princess, and the sky begins to glow an ominous red color, Revali takes flight to investigate the commotion. To his shock, he sees the center point of the Hylian civilization being enveloped in a whirlpool of dark clouds, lightning, and a ghostly specter soaring above the peaks of the majestic Hyrule Castle. He reports his findings to the rest of the group, and after discussing a strategy, he and the rest of the party take to the road, or in Revali's case, the skies. Blessed with the advantage of winged flight, Revali soars upwards to start his journey towards Vah Medoh, located in Rito village within the Hebra province. In terms of distance, his divine beast is actually the furthest from the promenade. However, without the hurdles of having to scale mountains and stick to the roads, his path leading to his ancient machine is by far the easiest, unless he had some company along the way, something we'll get into shortly. Now, we don't know exactly how fast Revali is, but it's safe to say that with his advantage of being able to fly, he will likely be one of the first, if not the first, to reach his divine beast, with Mipha being a possible contender since Vah Ruta is by far the closest to the promenade. With such a straightforward path, you would expect Revali's journey to be the most boring and unnecessary one to depict through gameplay. And there is a possibility that his road to Vah Medoh will simply not be included as a gameplay section, but let's spice it up a bit and sketch some awesome yet very speculative scenarios Age of Calamity could potentially use to make Revali's journey more interesting, starting with aerial battles.
Although Revali's path is depicted as a straightforward one in creating a champion, one thing that catches the attention is the fact that he actually flies right past Hyrule Castle and even slightly over the west side of Castletown. So what if Revali's way to Vah Medoh is hindered by flying enemies? The first of which would come to mind, of course, being the Guardian Skywatcher, the flying battleship variant of the grounded Guardian Stalker. This way, a path that looks like this would suddenly transform into something like this. If the engine of Hyrule Warriors permits it, aerial combat would definitely spice up the gameplay. It could make Revali's missions the most unique out of all the champions and would complement his overall skill set as a master of the bow. We did see a very short clip of Revali engaging grounded enemies, but in my opinion, a weapon like the bow doesn't reach the same potential as melee weapons or magic while grounded, since you would have to deal with draw speed, precise aiming, and a limited attack radius. So unless Revali all of a sudden uses melee attacks as well, something we haven't seen him do at any point in any of the cutscenes and as far as we know isn't part of his skill set, there needs to be a different way of making his combat more interesting, hence fights with flying enemies. There is one possible inconsistency though, and that is that it's not exactly clear if the Guardian Skywatchers will already be present at the castle at the time Revali is in its vicinity. According to the backstory of Breath of the Wild, the Skywatchers were not part of the mechanical army the Hylians dug up right before the Calamity. as Zelda hypothesizes in her research notes that there are potentially more Guardian types stored inside the 5 columns hidden underneath Hyrule Castle. If that is indeed where the Skywatchers are stored, the columns would have to have risen up by the time Revali reaches Castletown, something we aren't sure of as of right now, and it's still up for debate. Whatever the case may be, Age of Calamity might have to change this part of the lore to make this work, something I am totally fine with if it makes for more interesting gameplay. Alternatively, Revali could come under attack by other types of flying or floating enemies, like swarms of keys, cursed enemies, sky octoroks, or maybe even Wizropes could reach these heights. I mean, they do float after all.
After possibly having fought his way past Central Hyrule from up high, Revali enters the Hebra region. There are 2 significant settlements which could be used as the stage for a grounded gameplay section for Revali, that being Tabantha Village and his hometown Rito Village. If aerial combat is not going to be a thing, we might see Revali visit one or both of these settlements to help fend off a possible invasion. The Guardian Stalkers will in all likelihood not play a role in this due to its secluded location. Tabantha Village wasn't attacked by the Guardians until later stages of the Calamity, and Rito Village was spared this fate altogether. By the time the Guardians were getting close to the home of the Rito, Zelda sealed Calamity Ganon, after which he lost most direct control of his mechanical army. So in this case, these invasions or attacks would have to be related to monsters. Revali isn't exactly the most selfless character, but even if he doesn't care much for the fate of Tabantha Village, he would, at the very least, not leave his own people to fend off for themselves. If Rito Village is under monster attack, he would, in all probability, join the battle to ensure the safety of his tribe, and then move on to his divine beast as soon as things are under control. Vah Medoh is located pretty much at Rito Village, so from there it's a straight shot to its final destination. With that said, the next scenario is one we haven't discussed so far in the series, and was purposely saved for this episode. If all previous scenarios don't come to fruition, there is yet another way to really make Revali's journey very interesting. Since what if we actually get to control Vah Medoh for a while? What other divine beasts? This is a bit harder to imagine, since they would have to interact with the complex geography of Hyrule, like mountains, rivers, and valleys. Since Vah Medoh is airborne, this really isn't too much of a stretch. On top of that, Revali's war machine isn't just armed with a giant laser, which will probably just be overkill against smaller enemies, but it's also equipped with bow cannons. Perhaps we could switch between these different cannons and blast incoming enemies out of the sky. By this point, the giant pillars surrounding Hyrule Castle most definitely would have risen, so Skywatchers are now guaranteed to be flying around.
As soon as Revali gets Vah Medoh into position to take aim at Calamity Ganon himself, the Demon King uses his malice to corrupt the Divine Beast, turning it from friend to foe. Revali is faced with one of Ganon's horrific phantoms, which has now deemed itself the new master of the ancient machine. A fight ensues between the Rito warrior and Windblight Ganon. A fight which determines the fate of the many inhabitants of Hyrule, since the destructive power of Vah Medoh would be any settlement's worst nightmare. After a fierce battle, Revali is eventually bested by his opponent, and falls to the hands of the merciless Phantom. He suffers the same fate as the other champions, with his spirit now trapped inside the technological prowess he worked so hard for to master. But all was not for nothing. Despite losing the fight and thus his life to Windblight Ganon, he managed to keep up the fight long enough so that Vah Medoh was never to be used against his allies. With the power to vaporize entire cities with ease, it would have been unimaginable what could have happened had Revali not been there to hold off his nemesis for as long as he did. With the shortest lifespan of all of Hyrule's races, no Rito present at the time of Breath of the Wild was alive at the time of Revali's passing. However, his memory is passed on among his tribe, and their children are raised to be brave and skilled like their legendary ancestor. As for Revali himself, he will eventually get his sweet revenge due to the efforts of what was once his biggest rival from 100 years ago.